Okay, so we are both live and we are recording. So I'll say hi again. Can the TAs please check on the YouTube data channel where you actually see that stream popping up? And if not, let me know. It's a little tricky because we have the discrete structures class streaming simultaneously, and then there will be another class. And so the setup is a little bit more complicated than I'm used to. Great. So I'm Alex Lex. I'll be teaching this for data science. I wanted to take this opportunity before I switch to slides to also give the teaching assistants, teaching mentees a chance to introduce themselves. We currently have three TMs, Devin, Haihan, and Juja. And can you guys please just say hi quickly and tell a little bit about yourself?
I'll start. Hi, I'm Haihan. I'm a third-year PhD student with Alex. So we're part of the VDL group. We mostly do visualization design for domain expert. So I look forward working with y'all. I took this class 2 years ago, and I loved it. Yeah.
Thanks, Anne.
And it is live on YouTube. Yeah.
Great.
Cool. I can go second. I'm Devin. I'm another one of the TMs. I'm a second-year PhD student working with Alex, and I took the class last year. Also love the course. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Hi, my name is Youjia. I'm a third-year PhD student in the School of Computing, and my research also focuses on data visualization and topological data analysis. I also took this class 2 years ago, and I love this class. Hope you all enjoy this class.
Okay, great. So one thing that you'll notice is that everything here is public. So the links to the Zoom meeting is public, and the links to YouTube are public, and so on. And I would like to keep this going because usually, like, we get like people just like wanting to drop in. But of course, if we have some abuse or some Zoom bombing, we will kind of like have to restrict this. But I'm assuming that's going to be fine. Okay, great. So let's get started. So can you see my slides now? So this should be the title slide.
I think it's presenter notes right now.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yep.
Is this better?
There we go.
Cool, great. So visualization for data science. I like to start like a lot of my talks and also my lecture with this quote because I think it's kind of like really insightful. The purpose of computing is insight, not numbers. This is by Richard Hamming, a famous mathematician / computer scientist. And if you just modify that slightly, you get to the quote of the purpose of visualization is insight, not pictures. And what we really want to do is in this course is to learn how we can do data visualizations that don't like, it's not about creating pretty pictures, but it's about like enabling people to understand something about the data that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do, or at least wouldn't be able to do as easily. And this is kind of like, it seems also like a very obvious goal, but it's not actually the way that visualization is always handled. And so this is this example that I used to illustrate this. We have these 6 different plant species. These are all important agricultural plants, and so scientists might want to understand how do those plants, like what is their genetic relationships? Are they very similar genetically speaking, or are they very different? And so one way to look at this is like how many genes do those plants share? And this is a figure that actually appeared like this in like a Nature paper about the banana genome in 2012. And I give this as an example of like where I think that the authors just wanted to do something to make their article pretty instead of actually trying to make data visualization that is insightful. So this is supposed to show you the overlap of the banana genome and these 5 other plants. The problem with this chart is there's like a lot of there's these kinds of little segments down here, like visually small, that have like a very high, that correspond to a very high number of shared genes. Like 1,151 shared genes in this case. And so there's no proportionality between the importance of a particular segment and the actual importance of the data in, let me just, give me 1 second. I just want to make some of the TAs co-hosts so that they can mute people if necessary. Okay. Great. So I made Han and Devin co-host. So if you have any noise, just like please mute the people. Where was I? So like correspondence between the importance in the data set and the importance in the visualization. So like and a second example of like how this chart doesn't do that is this gigantic segment here in the bottom right. Like this is a segment with 105 shared genes. It's not particularly important, hence, and still it's very prominent on the screen. So this visualization clearly doesn't do a good job. And we'll learn in this class, I'll give you like very specific examples on how to do this problem better, but like right now, I really want to take a step back and talk about the goals of visualization. So like if you look up a dictionary, look for visualization, it's this formation of mental visual images, or the act or process of interpreting in visual terms or putting into visible form. And that's okay, but what we really talk about here is data visualization. So I kind of like to introduce a more, let's say, targeted definition for data visualization. And that definition is visualization is the process that transforms abstract data into interactive graphical representations for the purpose of exploration, confirmation, or presentation. And so what good data visualization is supposed to be doing is supposed to make data accessible. It's supposed to combine the strengths of humans and computers. It's supposed to enable insights, and it's supposed to communicate. And all of these different points are very important. This is Stu Card. He is one of the founding fathers of the field. And he said visualization is really about external cognition. That is how resources outside of the mind can be used to boost the cognitive capabilities of the mind. So think of this as like a simple example. Note-taking is something that allows you to structure your thoughts, right? And visualizations are even more so. Like you can have data in some form that you can use to think about a problem, to think about a data set, and then reason about it, and therefore boost your cognitive capabilities. So why do we want to visualize? There's these two high-level goals. So first is communications. Like one question that we'll be asking ourselves over the next 2 months frequently is, who is ahead in the election polls? By how much? How certain is that? Who is more likely to like win the Senate or the House or anything like that? So and here, like you'll see a lot of visualizations over the next month about this kind of stuff that are created by newspapers. And so some kind of like experts in statistical modeling and data visualization have sat down and kind of like thought carefully about how to present this to you. So they're using like their knowledge and their skills to communicate to you data that you might care about. And that's kind of like the form in which you might encounter visualization most frequently. But another type of visualization that is also quite relevant, especially for like a data scientist or for any kind of scientific process or decision-making process, is this exploration piece. So if you want to ask yourself, like, what is the structure of a terrorist network, or which drug can help patient X, or anything like that, if you have these unanswered questions and you don't have anybody else to curate a data set for you, then you're in this exploratory territory, which is also quite interesting. And so here are like two examples on the spectrum. On the right, we have a chart that was produced by the Obama administration back when Obama was up for re-election. And so this chart, the point of this chart is that like it shows US job losses from December 2007 to 2010. And so the point of this chart is very clearly communicative. So you see that basically the point of this chart is that to show you job losses were really like a major problem under the Bush administration, but under the Obama administration, everything like immediately became better. And there's so much there's so much selection in here, right? Like this, somebody has very carefully curated the chart to tell like not necessarily an unbiased story, right? This is like very clearly made to kind of make the Obama administration look good. And so, like, for example, like how like they kind of decided to clip the data in the beginning of 2008, which is kind of like the height of the financial crisis, right? And so this is just an example. Curation is always very important in communication. You need to be careful, like when you see data communicated to you, and to make sure that is it framed correctly and so on. Whereas in exploration, there's less of a curation piece. So this is like an example of a tool that we developed a couple of years ago. This is for like analyzing cancer subtypes based on the Cancer Genome Atlas data. So this is like looking at clusters of different data sets and seeing whether there's like some stable clustering that corresponds to, let's say, a subtype of a brain cancer that is maybe like diagnostically relevant, or that we can correlate with some predictions for outcomes and so on. So like just a different example. Here's another example for communication. This is about, it's a little bit older piece from the New York Times, and I'm gonna like frequently jump to live examples in this lecture. So can you guys still see my screen here? Seems like it. Yep. So here's this live example. And so this is about communicating Peyton Manning's record in passing, or in all-time touchdown passing record. And so what this visualization here does is very carefully curated about kind of like showing you the record of Peyton Manning here. Like you'll see his record is the only one that's bold, and it's also blue. Blue in this case here means it's an active player, and so kind of like easily distinguishes him, or like he distinguishes the group of people that could potentially still beat his record from everybody who is not active anymore. And then this is also interactive, so you can see that they carefully selected a couple of people that are interesting, but you can also reveal more detail about any of these other players on hover. So this is kind of like a layered piece where you have like more information if you want to look at it. And this is in contrast, this exploratory example, it's completely self-driven, right? Like there's no predefined path. So like, for example, here, I could start out with like a gene expression cluster and the copy number status, and then look at Kaplan-Meier plots dynamically, and then can draw my own conclusions and slice and dice the data in whichever way I want. And so there's no preconceived story. So why do we like visualization is about graphical representation, and so why graphical? Why not in another way? Well, graphical is also is quite like the bandwidth of how much information we can perceive simultaneously is just really high in terms of our visual system. So we can actually like look at the chart and understand the whole chart at the same time, or have at least a good sense of the structure. And so we can look at many data points at the same time, whereas other modalities such as like sound, for example, are much more linear. It's much more difficult to get like a big picture kind of thing with sound. And so we kind of like have to more or less listen to speech like you're doing right now. Of course, that has like many other different benefits. But it, like especially if you want to compute, if you want to show a lot of data, then the visual system is probably your best bet. So figures are richer. They provide more information with less clutter and in less space. They provide the Gestalt effect. They give you an overview. They make structure visible. And they're accessible. They're easier to understand. They're faster to grasp. They're more comprehensible. They're more memorable than, for example, texture forms. They're often more fun and frequently also less formal. So let me give you an example here. This is from an article in the New Yorker about Hurricane Katrina. And so I'm going to read this to you. Campanella then switched to an identically constructed map, only this time based on 2010 census data. And in bits and pieces on the screen, there was a simple and arresting picture of what Katrina meant. In the neighborhoods that were once a dense black, many of the little squares had thinned and turned gray. The sharp lines that once separated the teapot from Central City were now blurry. The white areas of the city were pushing north into the vacuum left by the exodus. The bywater was graying as it gentrified still further. Before Katrina, an American community survey estimated of New Orleans Parish population was 455,000 and about 68% Black, Campanella said. Now the latest estimated 384,000 and so on. And so the point here, why am I reading this to you, is the New Yorker doesn't ever publish graphics, like it never publishes data visualizations. And so they actually like say, here's this great graphic that shows something very intriguing, but they can't show it. So they have to describe it and they have to use a lot of complicated language to do that. And so I would argue that you probably don't have a good sense of what this graphic looks like right now. But if I showed you a graphic like this is not exactly the same data set. This shows Katrina's diaspora, so kind of like where did people move after Katrina? But this is something that you can immediately grasp, right? You see that like that clearly there is like a lot of people moved locally, but people moved as far as Seattle and the New York and Boston areas. And so I don't have to use colorful language. I can show you the picture and you can see that yourself if you use data visualization. Of course, there's reasons not to visualize. Sometimes you kind of want to automate stuff. And so the most important thing is if you have a well-defined question on a well-defined data set, then you don't need data visualization. Like, for example, if you just want to know which gene is most frequently mutated in this set of patients, and you don't care about the context because like you might know all of that context already, then all you need to know is the answer. And you can just look at an algorithm. You can like give you like a list of the top 2 or 3 most mutated genes and you have your result, right? But maybe if you kind of want to understand like how frequently are they mutated relative to each other, how uncommon is that mutation corresponding to, let's say, a larger population, then suddenly you're again in a territory where you might use visualization. Or if you say, what is the current unemployment rate? If you don't care about the context, is it higher or lower? You don't need data visualization. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Like visualization is always targeting humans, like human decision makers or humans learning something. And if human intervention is not possible or not necessary, then you don't want to use data visualization. So for example, if you need decisions in minimal time, for example, high frequency stock trading, there isn't really like, you need to make these decisions in milliseconds. It doesn't make sense to visualize things. Although I recently read a paper about like visualizing the performance of high frequency stock market trading algorithms. So looking at something in like more context again might make sense with visualization. Or in manufacturing, for example, if you need to make a decision whether a bottle is broken, you could build like a computer vision system that recognizes whether a bottle is broken. In theory, you could build a visualization that shows you this bottle is broken here, but in practice, this is just so fast, you don't want a human to be involved. You just want to like discard that bottle. And then sometimes there's also like these automatic data products like your Netflix recommendation engine, where you don't like, where it's impractical for scale for humans to be involved. And I mentioned earlier that we have this kind of like duality between what computers can do well and what humans can do well, and that visualization is kind of like in the sweet spot. It's kind of leverages both what computers can do well and what humans can do well. And so here's this ability matrix, and this is of course only like schematically. We have computers are really good at data storage, at numerical calculations, at searching and finding, and they're getting better at logic, at planning, at maybe at diagnosis, and maybe at prediction to some extent. But then humans really excel at cognition, higher level cognition and understanding, bringing in common knowledge and bringing in creativity. And so data visualization kind of like allows you to leverage both of those worlds. Another reason to use like a reason to use computers is like, of course, you could do data visualizations by hand. And I'll show you some examples today where people have drawn beautiful charts by hand. But like this is a computer science course. And so we will be looking at how can we do data visualization using computers. And why do we care about that? Well, there's like many obvious benefits. One is, of course, scale, like drawing by hand or in Illustrator is like infeasible and inflexible. For example, if I drew a chart of the unemployment in the United States by an Illustrator, and then like a month later I get new data, I have to manually add the point. It's just like inflexible, right? And sometimes it's also impossible. Like if you have MRI data, if you go like have your, let's say, knee scanned, you can't really draw an MRI scan by hand, right? This is like, this data is digital in the first place. And so you need to kind of visualize it. Sometimes you just have to use a computer. And then we don't, like in this class, we won't be talking about making charts, but we'll be talking about interactive visualization. And interaction is great because it allows users to drill down into the data, much like in this football passing example that I showed earlier. I hovered over the individual players and select and would reveal the name. I can have like more complex interactions like this one here. So this is like a technique that like a student of mine implemented many years ago, but it shows a hierarchy, and you can simply select an element down the hierarchy that will pop out, and you will see that element in more detail. And so something like that is, of course, only possible on a computer. And then we have the power of like integrating data visualizations with algorithms. So this is like sometimes called visual analytics. If I have like machine learning algorithms or other kinds of algorithms like ranking algorithms and so on that I can leverage to like analyze data, and I can go even further in this kind of human-computer interaction of like, or data hybrid data analysis essentially, than I could if I didn't use computers. Then of course efficiency, I can reuse charts or methods for different data sets. Quality, I can do very precise data-driven renderings. And then I can do animations, like like if I just do like a drawing, I can't really use storytelling techniques unless I present it myself. So you can use time, you can actually create interactive storytelling videos or applications. So let me give you like an interesting example of a storytelling video that kind of combines real video with data visualization.
Mariano Rivera is one of the most dominant closers in history. But what may be most remarkable is that he has done it by confounding hitters with mostly one pitch, his signature cutter. John Flaherty of the Yes Network faced Rivera as a hitter and also caught him when he played for the Yankees.
From a hitter standpoint, he's out on the mound. It feels like he's not even putting any effort into it, and the ball explodes on you. And from a catching standpoint, he's the easiest guy ever to catch because he throws the ball right where you want it.
Rivera uses a seemingly effortless delivery, which he can flawlessly repeat pitch after pitch. His cutter is thrown very much like a fastball, but the pitch has significant lateral movement. He creates and adjusts this movement with the different pressure he puts on the ball with his fingers. The pitch's lateral movement keeps it off the bat's sweet spot, moving in on the hands of a left-handed batter and toward the end of the bat of a righty. To a hitter, Rivera's cutter first appears like a straight fastball, making it hard to distinguish the two pitches during the first fractions of a second when the hitter must decide if, when, and where to swing. Hitters often rely on reading a pitch's spin to determine what pitch is coming, but Rivera's fastball and cutter have what appear to the hitter as the same spin. Many pitchers throw their cutters more like sliders, with their fingers pulling down on the side of the ball. This can create more downward and lateral movement than a cutter, but it also creates the signature spin of a slider, a spinning red dot that the hitter can recognize and adjust to. With identical deliveries and spins on Rivera's pitches, hitters are at a loss to identify and then attack the pitch until it is too late, and the balls end up in very different locations. Here are the nearly 1,300 pitches that Rivera threw in 2009, each at the point when the batter must make his swing decisions. But with few clues to determine the pitch's ultimate location, the batter can be faced with guessing at these outcomes. Here are the cutters to left-handers. Here are the cutters to right-handers, and fastballs to right-handers. He throws almost no fastballs to lefties. As this map of his 2009 pitches shows, Rivera is remarkably adept at hitting the corners, keeping the ball away from the middle of the plate, the easiest spot for a batter to make good contact.
Looking from this perspective, it's not surprising that the real hot spot is inside on a lefty. I think he could hit that spot with his eyes closed.
Rivera's simple but effective formula has made him baseball's most dominant closer.
So in addition to like storytelling, we also have to kind of like ask ourselves the question, why do we want to use data visualization and not just use statistics? I tried to convince you earlier, but here I'll give you another example. So this is what's called like a famous data set that's called Anscombe's quartet. And we have 4 different data sets with X and Y dimensions. And if you look at the data, you will like see that there's something funny going on in some of them. But if you do some statistics, you will see like some simple descriptive statistics. All of these data sets have exactly the same mean, exactly the same variance, exactly the same correlation, and exactly the same linear regression. So if you just looked at these simple statistical measures, you would conclude that those data sets are in fact identical or very similar. But if you actually visualize the data, you see that there's very, very different things going on. So you have like a linear relationship with some noise on the left here. You have like a nonlinear relationship in the second chart, and then you have the effects of outliers in the third and the fourth chart. And so even if you want to use statistics eventually, you always need to look at your data to make sure there's nothing funny going on. And this isn't really limited to only these simple charts. You can actually like this here is like a data SAR, and this is a paper about how you can actually generating the statistical measures for this data set with basically any shape. So for all of these shapes and the intermediate stages, these statistical measures shown on the right here remain constant. And so that kind of just emphasizes that like you really should look at your data sets if you want to be sure that what you're trying to describe, even if it's statistically, is actually there. And so the way I think about visualization, and we in our group think about visualization, that it's really all about like human data interactions, like having humans interact with their data through the means of the computer. And this is like very consciously close to the like bigger field of human-computer interaction or human-centered computing. So let's talk a little bit about data. So what's the role of visualization in like the data science process? This is kind of a figure that I've adapted from Kathy O'Neill and Rachel Schutz's book about doing data science. And so we have the real world. Then we collect some information about the real world, some what's called raw data, even if there's probably not such a thing as real raw data. Then we process the data in some way. Then we clean the data. Then we do some exploratory data analysis, like usually using visualization. Then we might build some machine learning models or some statistical models or run some machine learning algorithms. And then we might want to kind of like communicate our findings, report them, and eventually make a decision. Or alternatively, we want to build a data product like our Netflix recommendation system, and then influence the real world with that again. And so this is kind of like how data science typically works, and how like much of the much of machine learning, the whole process where you would use machine learning works. But I want to highlight the individual aspects where we can actually use visualization. So first, clearly exploratory data analysis is key to use visualization. Clear that this is like what I just showed you, Anscombe's quartet. You want to kind of look at your data, you want to understand what's going on, and then you can build like a model on top of it, for example. But you, of course, also want to use visualizations to communicate any findings that you might have. So like if you build a model and you have a prediction, or even just for the raw data, you need to probably tell somebody else about it, or you need to make a decision. And in that case, you want to like report your findings, ideally using visual means. But you can also use visualization in this data processing and data cleaning stages here. So for example, data cleaning is something that can be well supported by visualizations. There's like a big commercial company that's called Trifacta that is all about visual data cleaning. We've published papers on visual data wrangling and cleaning data. So this is kind of like a new and emerging field. And then clearly, if you're a machine learning engineer or an AI scientist, you kind of also want to understand what's going on with your algorithms. And so visualization has been increasingly used for, let's say, things like explainable AI, or just looking at what are the effects of the different models or the different parameters that you're running and so on. And so visualization is becoming more important in that space as well. And here's now like the next couple of slides will be the obligatory. We have so much data. Big data, what does that mean? In 2017, we collected about 2.5 exabytes of data per day, which is largely unstructured. So unstructured meaning things like videos, like this lecture, for example, being streamed to YouTube is of course part of that. And it's like assumed that 90% of the data that is in existence is created in the last 2 years. And that kind of like is probably still true, like this exponential growth of data. And if you, like just as an example, if you Google for YouTube cat videos, you will have like more than 500 million results. And if you wanted to like just to have a sense of how much exabytes is in punch cards, if you wanted to stack store 15 exabyte in punch cards and stack that up and store it somewhere, you would have to stack it up 4.5 kilometers over all of New England. So that would be higher than the ice sheet in the last ice age. Here's a website that kind of nicely illustrates this. Like what is happening in 1 second on the internet. There's like 9,000 tweets sent, and I'm scrolling through this here. 1,000 Instagram photos uploaded, 1,700 Tumblr posts, 4,900 Skype calls, about 100 gigabytes of internet traffic in a single second. And then we can keep going, and I'm gonna like scroll here a little faster because this is getting too boring. And eventually we'll get to like Google searches, and then finally to emails. And email is especially still like there's so many emails still being sent. So just to give you a bit of a sense, you can play with this on your own. The links are always in the slides. Data can also be very personal. Here's some data that is being automatically collected about myself. So here is like Google, if you have an Android phone, and you're not opting out, Google is collecting your location data. And it actually makes that very transparent. It tries to tell you like, this is the data we collect, and you can look at your data like this. So for example, the map up there is like my pre-COVID travels to different places in the world. Or this was a single day, like on the lower left was a single day where I simply like went between my home and work, again, pre-COVID times, and then picked somebody up at the airport. And you can actually see where I went to lunch that day if you look closely. So this is very detailed data. Or if you use some kind of like fitness trackers, like a Garmin watch or at least Strava, then of course you're collecting data about yourself. Here's like a ride that I did on the Wasatch Crest Trail a couple of years ago. In addition to personal data, big data is also, of course, transforming science and engineering. Mostly it's happening because we have these cheap and very good sensors like imaging. Everybody now has great cameras on their phones, but we have other sensors like, for example, genome sequencing that are equally like have made equally impressive improvements. So large physics experiments and observations collect tons and tons of data. Genome sequencing is becoming cheaper and more automated, so that we are like now, it kind of like outpaced Moore's law, as you can see in the graphic on the right, the cost per megabase versus Moore's law. Smart buildings and cities, tracking information about where people are. So for example, Blinsky is a Salt Lake City company that monitors traffic or movement of people, actually of their cell phones. So they just put up towers, and your phone, as you move around through the city or through Park City or through the university campus, your phone isn't connecting to the towers, but it's kind of pinging them, and they can build a movement profile based on that. And so like your data is collected about you even as you're like not even aware about it. And so in the sciences, there's this controversy about can we do like pure data-driven methods? Are discoveries that are not based on a hypothesis but based on data as valuable, or are they more kind of like dangerous or not? And I don't want to give an answer to that, but I just want to like point it out that this is a difficult problem. So in genomics, these are just some examples of like where you would use sensors to collect data. For example, you can like TCGA, this is what I mentioned earlier, this Cancer Data Initiative in the United States collected 1 petabyte of data. You can get your own genome sequenced by 23andMe or other providers. There's like thumb drive size genome sequencers. We can do things like reconstruct the tree of life based on genome sequencing, and so on. And so there's like many of those applications nowadays. Data is also stored in exceeding quantities. So here, this is a picture of the NSA's Utah data center in Bluffdale, Utah, which some people consider to be probably the largest storage facility in the world, data storage facility. Estimates, it's like how much data is there is vary a lot, but NPR, National Geographic estimate there's 5 zettabytes of data stored in there. And just to give you a sense, this is like a lot. It's like one zettabyte is 1,000 exabytes, with 1,000 petabytes, with 1,000 terabytes. So this is like maybe a unit that you're familiar with on your computers. I want to quote this Google's chief economist here on the ability to take data, to be able to understand it, to process it, to extract value from it, to visualize it, to communicate it. That's going to be a hugely important skill in the next decades, because now we really do essentially have free and ubiquitous data. So now I've talked about data, and since this is about human and data interaction, and now I want to talk a little bit about humans next. And humans are like perfectly capable of doing many great things. Like we really want to leverage human capabilities like pattern discovery. For example, we're very good at discovering clusters in 2D or outliers or trends, but we are really good at bringing contextual knowledge. Like we have an understanding of the world that isn't currently, cannot be captured in data, and that cannot be captured by computer systems. So like expectations for a data set, explanations for some patterns and so on. This is really what humans can do best. And then humans also are the ones that usually take action. But humans have limitations, and we have to be, like when we create data visualizations, we have to be very aware of these limitations, and we need to take them into account when we design. So for example, like you cannot, like even if you can draw something, you can't read it sometimes. So these are 2 examples of really huge networks that somebody drew with maybe the goal of like making these network structures understandable. But I would argue that they failed. Essentially, they just created these giant hairballs, and there isn't really anything that we can learn from these visualizations other than they're big. The data is big, but there's also like some more subtle limits of cognition. So here is, again, this is from a psychology experiment. You see this guy, this white-haired guy, is being asked for directions by this other person here with the map in the hand. And now notice that they're actually switching. And the white-haired person doesn't even recognize that he's talking to a different person. And so what's going on here is that this is called like selective attention, right? He's been paying attention to describing, like to solving the task at hand, describing giving the directions, so that they actually didn't process even like who they were talking to. It's just like they had like a rough category. This is not a human being, but they didn't actually like look at the person in detail and never noticed that something was wrong here. And things like that we'll talk about in the perception lecture. There's many of these kind of like illusions or pitfalls that we have when we process information that we need to be aware of when we design visualizations. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the history of visualization. I don't want to, well, I'm going to start with cave paintings, but I'm going to keep it like fairly brief, so don't worry too much. So like graphical depictions kind of like trace themselves back to, as I just said, cave paintings. And the idea here is Donald Norman is like a famous AI researcher. He did things that make us smart, like the tools and the books that we write. These are the things that kind of like make humans are like really strongly involved in the let's say evolution of like human society, and they are the things that really make us smart. And we have like early examples of visualization, like for example music notation or mathematical notations like trigonometry and so on. Or maps are of course like a very like ancient source, like this depicting space. So here is like one of the oldest known maps is this town map of Konya in Turkey, which is estimated to be about 6,200 BC. And then here is like a map from 550 BC of the Mediterranean and the continents around it, according to the knowledge that people had back then. of course, we also want to record information. So when we study something, for example, Leonardo da Vinci was well known for like looking carefully at anatomy, and so he would record what he saw in life or in bodies. When he did experiments, he would actually record that, and then somebody else wouldn't have to go through the experiment and could use his recordings to understand what is going on. And the same is true for like phases of the moon or like plants and so on. This here is kind of like an example of photography, how photography was used to kind of like solve an interesting question. So back in like, this was in 1878, people weren't completely sure whether if a horse is galloping, whether all of its hoofs are off the ground or not at the same time. So whether it's like actually in the air. And that was kind of like hotly debated in social circles back then. And Edward Muybridge kind of like demonstrated that, in fact, the hoofs are off the ears at the same time by rigging like a set of cameras with like little wires and then having the horse as it runs through it kind of like take the picture and take a snapshot. And so what it looks like is on the left, and then you see like an animation that somebody has created. Basically, you could say this was kind of like a very early video. Just a little anecdote, Edward Muybridge is also this person that he was kind of controversial because he shot and killed his wife's lover and was later acquitted for justifiable homicide, which was clearly a different time. Here are some examples of like astronomical or weather data or wind data, like planetary movement diagram around like 950. And then, of course, if you were like seafaring, you really wanted to understand what are the major wind flows among the oceans. And so here's like a wind map that roughly shows that. Then William Playfair is like a very influential person if we talk about the history of, let's say, statistical graphics. And so here are some examples of charts. He has like on the bottom left, he's exports and imports to and from Denmark and Norway for England. And so you see that he has these two charts, line of exports, line of imports, and then he has the balance against England and then balance in the favor of England. And similar things for exports and imports from Scotland. So here, he kind of like in the bottom left, he used an early example of a line or an area chart, and the bottom on the top right, there's an early example of a bar chart. And then here on the bottom right, we have a pie chart. This kind of like shows us the proportion of land mass of the Turkish Empire. So you can see it's roughly a quarter European, like a slightly smaller share African, and the rest of it Asian. One famously quoted visualization is this map by John Snow, which kind of like shows the cholera outbreak in London. And this was back in a time when it wasn't completely clear how cholera was transmitted. We now know that it's kind of like often bacteria that are waterborne. And so John Snow was a physician, and he kind of like used a map, and he kind of came, like, the story goes that he came to that conclusion independently, but he used this map to communicate his findings to other people. And so you see these little bars here, these black bars next to the cities. Let me see what I can. Yeah. Well, you see this like the green and the red circle here, and then the black bars next to them. These black bars correspond to cholera cases. And the dots that are highlighted here in green and red, they correspond to the location of water pumps. And what you can see is that the cases of cholera, they kind of cluster around one particular water pump. So the green water pump, there's not a lot of cholera cases. So what you could kind of assume here is that the people that used that water pump were disproportionately affected by cholera, versus the people that used the other water pump didn't have as much of a cholera incidence. And so what he concluded is that this is born in the water and not born in the air, for example. And this is the other classical example from one of Tufte's book. This is a map by Charles Minard from 1869, and it shows Napoleon's Russian campaign. And it has been often cited as the best data visualization ever made. This is, of course, very customly handcrafted. And so what this shows you is like the size and the trajectory and the fate of Napoleon's army in the Russian campaign. And you see that like on the very left, Napoleon started out. Let me see if I can do some annotation here. Yeah, let me change the color. So Napoleon started out around here, and the width of this here corresponds to the size of his army. And you can see that parts of the army branched off, and like the bright color here, the brownish color, is the is kind of like the way towards Moscow, and then the black is the retreat from Moscow. And you see that the size of the army constantly dwindled over time. So this map shows the size of the army. It shows the progression, like these little things here are time. Then it also shows some geographic features like rivers. And you'll see that he actually arrived at Moscow with like an army that was much, much smaller than what he started with. In the actual kind of like fighting, there wasn't barely any casualties, but then on the retreat, you can see that there are these events where the army diminished more and more. And then here, they were rejoined by like a segment that branched off earlier. And then this was like in the late winter, and this is why these losses were so high. Like here you see the temperature at the bottom, like this line here is the temperature on the retreat. And you can see it was really freezing back then. And then when the army had to cross that river, about half of the remaining army actually perished, and he only returned to well, left Russia with like a tiny, tiny sliver, a fraction of his army. Okay. So this here is like a nice source, infowetrust.com. That's kind of like a nice curation of the history of these data visualizations. So I encourage you to kind of like play around with this later. And here's another example of like a historic visualization, the subway map in London. And what the goal here, this is from 1927. The goal here is, of course, to like allow you to navigate the system and to go to places. And the stations here roughly correspond to the actual locations. And you can see where you need to do an interchange to like get into a different line. But of course, this is like one particular goal that is mostly spatial. If you wanted to ask a question about how long does it take me to go from one place to another, like here would be an example of how to do that. So this is now spaced not by geography, but by time. This is for the Boston subway system. And so you can see that like here, if you go from Alewife to the city center, it will take you about like 18 minutes or so to go there, because this is in the, on this radial chart. If you need to go to from Boston College to the city center, it will take you about 40 minutes. So very different times. But even though, like, if you know anything about Boston, you will know that the Green Line is very slow. And so this is not actually geographically that far away. It's just that the line here is slower. And then one thing that we also need to be aware of, like, is what are, like, we use these kind of like fancy devices like touch screens or even like maybe VR devices and so on nowadays. But where does this all come from? And this is like from early HCI research. I want to show these two videos here, like a little snapshots of these two videos. On the left here is like Ivan Sutherland, who developed this tool called Sketchpad. He'll talk about it at MIT, but he was also later a professor at Utah. And then on the right, I'll talk about this after that.
From the command of the computer to draw a line, it will draw a line from this position where I am now to any subsequent position of my light pin. This is much like a rubber band stuck in two pins. One is nailed on the screen here, and the other is at my light pin. So I can position this anywhere I want. Now, I lost tracking there. I moved the pin too fast, and that told the computer to stop drawing a line. Well, if you notice, that bright dot will jump onto the line as I get close to it. Well, the dot in the center of the cross, when you get close to the line, jumps over onto it. Correct. Well, why does it do that? It's much like a gravity field. At the end point, it is even a higher gravity field. It will allow us to position the point exactly on the line, or in this case, exactly at the end point. This allows me to move my pen quite coarsely, be sloppy while I'm drawing, and get a precision drawing out at the same time. So now I'm going to draw a second line. There you go. And even a third one. Now, in an ordinary pencil and paper drawing, all we have is this particular picture. But the computer understands the geometry of the drawing here. What do I mean? I mean that if I point at this particular point and tell the computer to move that point by another push button command, it will move not only that point, but all three lines that are attached to it.
And the delay between it's doing what you want it to is because it's computing all these changes.
That's correct. Now, if I made a mistake, I could delete my mistake by pointing at.
So I don't want to show all of this, but this is like an early example of interactive graphics, right? And so I find that very exciting. And then here is like a video of the mother of all demos. And I've just picked like a short segment. This is actually
that version to help you.
It's actually a 1 hour 40 demo that was presented by Douglas Engelbart in 1968. And it's kind of like kicked off like interactive visual computing, and like basically a ton of the principles that we are using nowadays on our daily computers were pioneered in this demo. And I'm just going to show you like the first ever demo of a computer mouse here.
So I'm going to open up under here and talk to you about the control techniques, control devices, control dialogue, and control meta language that we're using. Okay, to talk about control devices, we'll use this overhead camera shot where you can see the devices that I'm using. I use 3, and they're not all standard. We have a plain device called our mouse, a standard keyboard, and a special key set we have here. And we're going to go for a picture down in our laboratory in Menlo Park and pipe it up. That'll show you from another point of view more about how that mouse works. Come in, Menlo Park. Okay, there's Don Andrews' hand in Menlo Park. And in a second, we'll see the screen that he's working and the way the tracking spot moves in conjunction with movements of that mouse. I don't know why we call it a mouse. Sometimes I apologize. It started that way, and we never did change it. All right, as it moves up or down or sideways, so does the tracking spot. And the principles for its operation are quite easy to see. You'll turn it over, Don. Can you hear me, Don? Would you turn it over and we'll see, right? Its principle is that there are 2 wheels that roll on the surface. But since they're right angles and kind of sharp edges, one roll and the other slide in one direction. Each of these wheels controls through a potentiometer with a voltage output sampled by an 880 converter. The numbers taken in by the computer at sample times as to what the horizontal and vertical components are to be of where it should put the tracking spot. And
Okay, so they not only demoed the mouse here, but they also demoed hypertext and like video conferences and all of these kinds of like amazing technologies that we now like are very used to. So I want to give you a couple of modern examples. So this is usually more fun in the classroom, but I'll still try to do that. This is like the baby name wizard. And a baby name wizard is essentially just a tool, a visualization tool that shows you how popular are certain baby names over time. And so I'm gonna like start with myself, but just like if you wanna like want me to look up your name, just be ready to kind of like shout out your name. So Alexander was kind of like very popular, like became very popular roughly in the 1980s, right around where I was born. So it's not particular, like my parents were probably not very creative. If you look up Devin, we can find that Devin was like most popular somewhere like around like beginning of 1990s, end of 1980s, which I'm guessing is roughly when Devin was born. So like what you'll find here is that very frequently your peers are not as creative as you might think. Like, anybody want me to try their name?
Yeah, do Michael.
Michael. I would guess that Michael was very popular, like rose in prominence in the 40s, and then like was the second most popular name in the 1960s.
How about Kenny?
Kenny was very popular end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s.
So I'm no longer relevant.
You try Leon?
The absolute numbers probably are still rising. This is just percentages, right?
Professor?
Yep.
Can you try Leon? Leon?
Leon.
Oh, yeah.
Leon, kind of like has, this is the name starting with. And so Leon seemed to be very popular in the 1920s, but has recently regained popularity a little bit.
Okay.
Sorry, a more ethnic name, just VAI.
VAI. This is only the top 1,000 names
gotcha.
in the US. And so unfortunately, some of the, like Hai Han is also not in there. I tried earlier.
Better luck next time.
Yeah, the link is in the slide. So if you want to like look up your name or your friends' names, you can do that.
I have a comment on that, which it's actually came from a visualization of the guy who runs Pandas for the package in Python. But he did something similar to like a live performance and just talked about how you can use visualization. What he actually ended up showing, like just randomly, was that it was more that like all of the popular names like Michael just became less popular because more names were being used in total, right? So like the most popular names became less popular and more names were being used in total.
Yes, that's absolutely true. That's what you frequently see. If you put in like a biblical name like Jacob or anything like that, you see they are maybe still very highly ranked, but the absolute numbers of children being given that name is dropping. Oops. So I'm going to skip over this video. I'm going to put a link to it later. I'm kind of like running short on time, and I want to make sure that I get through the administrative part. But this is like, I wanted to show like a video for communication. I'll just post this later. So we already introduced ourselves. Here's just like some pictures again of us. Like you will see us, of course, like mostly on video feeds. It's Devin, Hai Han, and Jusha as your teaching mentees. All of them are teaching mentees, not teaching assistant, which means that they will also be like teaching a lecture on occasion. I myself, I'm an associate professor of computer science, both at the Ski Institute and the School of Computing. Before I joined Utah, I was a lecturer and a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard, and I am originally from Austria. I did my PhD in computer science in Graz at the Graz University of Technology. This is a picture from like a hike I did very close to my hometown, and so you can see that I haven't strayed too far from the mountains, even if I have strayed far from my hometown geographically. I co-direct the Visualization Design Lab together with Mariah Meyer. If you want to look up our lab, you can go to vdl.sci.utah.edu. This is a recent picture just from February, pre-COVID, of our group. Of course, things have changed a little bit, but this gives you, like, you see Devin and Hai Han in this picture. No, not Hai Han. Yeah, just Devin. Hai Han is there too, sorry. So yeah, this is our group. If you want to learn more about the work we do, go to the website. The Ski Institute, if you're new to Utah, is this interdisciplinary institute which draws faculty from computer science, computer engineering, biomedical engineering, math, and occasionally some other areas. Also students, and we specialize in scientific computing, biomedical computing, scientific visualization, information visualization, and image analysis. And so this is a picture of the various Ski faculty here at the bottom. And if you want to learn more about Ski, you can go to sci.utah.edu. I'm also going to skip over this. This is just some words about like my research, but I really want to go to like, what do you need to do to be successful in this class? So what you will learn in this class is how to efficiently visualize data. We will spend a lot of time evaluating and critiquing visualization designs. Then you will learn on how to apply these principles and techniques and create your own visualizations and design visual data analysis solutions. So this is kind of like the theory part that I want you to learn. And then there's also the part where you need to learn how to actually build this. So we'll spend like a fair amount of time on like teaching skills on like developing visualizations on the web. How can we implement interactive data visualizations? And we are using a web environment because this is really where visualization nowadays happens, and we'll use a very popular library called D3. And so like we'll try to balance between the three different skills: theory, design skills, and coding skills. Theory will be conveyed in lectures, in readings, and in discussion. Coding skills will be conveyed in lectures as well, but also in labs. You need to like do the readings about the coding stuff. And of course, there will be some self-study, and you can use office hours and Slack to get help and to get more information. And then design skills, you will develop them by doing these many critiques and by doing redesigns yourself. And so I'll talk about what that means a little bit later. So we have this kind of like here is also, of course, like a little bit unique and different this year than it usually is. So we have lectures, which is what you're experiencing right now. These are recorded. In a lecture, it will be typically me giving like something like this, a presentation. But then most lectures, like almost every single one, except for this one here, we will do like a critique or a redesign of a visualization technique. And the goal here is to develop an eye for visualization design, learning by example. And this is like a very common thing, for example, in art, to like critique others' work to really understand what is going on. And this is usually in class. I do this in like little groups, and on Zoom, we'll do this in breakout groups. So you will be assigned to groups of 3 or 4, and then like talk about a visualization that we give you, and then you discuss that, and then we'll meet back up in the main session and discuss it together. And this will not be recorded. So I'll usually try to put those at the end of the lecture. I'll stop the recording. And then you'll do this in breakout groups, and then we'll discuss this. So like this is, it's clearly, I don't want to like record you discussing something in your breakout groups. So just be aware, this is something that you have to actually be in the Zoom call to be able to participate. And since I kind of like, it's difficult to like measure participant, and I don't want to force anybody to be here synchronously all the time. You can like, sometimes it's okay if you just look at the video, but I do want you to show up here occasionally. And so to kind of like check for that, I'm asking you to submit 5 critiques that you do in lecture within 2 days after posting. So we'll be doing roughly like 15 or 20 of those in total. And 5 times, whenever you want to, whenever it's a good time for you, you just like write a single page, like can be handwritten, take a picture of it, and then you submit it to Canvas. And that's kind of like just my way of making sure that everybody keeps engaged with the class. In addition to lectures, we will also have labs. These are like run by the TAs, TMs. These are short coding tutorials. They will give you examples, kind of revisiting stuff we did in the lectures. These will be recorded. This will be based on a published and annotated script. And a hint is that these will be always very, very strongly related to homework assignments. So basically, these labs will essentially say, here are the techniques, or here's the technology that you need to do, like that you need to master to be successful in the homeworks. And so really, like if the technology is a challenge, definitely make sure to go through the labs and ask questions, or at least watch the recordings. Then we'll have homeworks. We'll have 6 homeworks that help practice specific skills. The first homework will be a design one, and then the rest of them will all implement, will also all include some kind of software development, some kind of software engineering, all of it on the web. And then the final project is kind of meant to combine like these technical skills and the design skills, give you an opportunity to work in a team and develop like one big complete visualization project. The schedule is like Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have lectures. These are synchronously but recorded. Labs will be Mondays 5 to 6, but they will be scheduled on demand. So we'll let you know there's no lab this week. There might not be a lab next week. We will always post in the Slack announcement channel if there is a lab or if there is no lab. You can also review the lectures on the YouTube channel. And just like for like, if you're interested, there's kind of 3 major components in terms of the structure of the lectures. We have technical foundations. So I'll start teaching JavaScript and HTML and D3 and SVG and so on next Tuesday. And then there's visualization fundamentals such as perception, visual encodings, design guidelines, which is kind of the theory lectures in the first half of the semester. And in the second half of the semester, we'll stop doing technical lectures and we'll stop doing fundamental lectures and instead move all into data visualization. Like how can we visualize tabular data? How can we visualize networks and graphs? How can we visualize maps and so on? On the website, you'll find our schedule. All our office hours and so on are in this Google Calendar. So you can just subscribe to that Google Calendar. All of the Zoom links for any meeting are also going to be in that calendar. I already mentioned the website. The website is kind of like your resource for everything. Like, please make sure to read the syllabus. Please make sure to read the front page. And then also, like, when it's time for projects, to start thinking about projects, make sure to read the project page. Like, a lot of the information is up there. Like, if there's anything not up there, you are super welcome to ask them. But please make sure to look at the syllabus and the website first before you ask a question. For communication, since this is going to be all remote, we will strongly rely on our Slack team. We, as the course staff, will make sure that we try to be as responsive as possible. Please use Slack for all general purpose questions like about code or about concepts. Please don't use personal messages either to me or the TAs. You usually should ask a question that also some other student can answer, because otherwise, this is a fairly big class this time around. We have 126 students. If we get personal messages all the time about why doesn't this particular line of code not work, we will just not be able to keep up. And so just make sure to not post too much code, but ask more generic questions. If you need to talk about us in something personally, for example, I'm sick or I can't, whatever, you have some personal reasons to talk to us, use emails or use office hours. But sometimes if your TA sees you have a question on code, you asked it in a public channel, they might ask you to please send you their code in a private channel, but just be mindful of our bandwidth. We will use Canvas only for grades and homework submissions. So we will not be using any of the communication or dissemination features of Canvas. Everything will be on the website, but you will submit your homeworks and your project milestones and so on Canvas, and you will get your grades on Canvas. You should talk to us in office hours. I always have my office hours Tuesday after class, after a 10-minute break. So this will be a Zoom meeting again, and yeah, just join, and then I'll, depending on what kinds of question it is, it will be like a one-on-one thing with waiting rooms, or it might be like a group thing where we take turns or something like that. We'll figure that out. And the TAs are there mostly for, let's say, technical help. If you just struggling with the homework or anything like that, or just want some help, they will also host Zoom-based office hours. So just be prepared to share your screen and so on when you're in a TA meeting. My email is alex@sci.utah.edu. A general policy is that we were asked by the university to essentially ignore every email we get from students that is not from a utah.edu email address. So if you're sending me email from your personal Gmail address, I'm actually not supposed to reply. I'm going to reply probably going forward with please send me an email from your official account. This is because of FERPA. They really want that all of the data that is sensitive, like your grades and any kind of information, like private personal information, is stored in the proper channels. As you know, that we have had cybersecurity incidents in the last couple of years, and so this is a new, stricter policy. There's 2 required textbooks for the class. Both are available online for free from campus. You might have to VPN in to be able to do that, or go through the library. Interactive data visualization for the web by Scott Murray is something that we'll be using in the beginning a lot, because this is the technical skills. And then we'll have this visualization analysis and design by Tamara Munsner, which is a graduate level textbook, which is a great resource. The readings are frequently from that book. And I usually give the chapters for each lecture to read on the website. And sometimes we'll also read papers, and then I'll mention ahead of time when I want to spend some dedicated time in lecture to discuss the paper. And yeah, for grad students, these readings are also like essentially fair game on the tests, whereas undergraduate students can basically rely that I will not be asking questions that go beyond what we are teaching in lectures. So in terms of programming, we'll be using HTML, JavaScript, and D3 in addition to CSS. HTML5 is getting like, and the whole JS infrastructure is getting like more sophisticated and more pleasant to work with over time. And so I personally enjoy it, and it's great to build visualizations and to easily share them. And so I hope you will enjoy that too. In terms of prerequisites for this course, you should not be a programming novice. Like this is a computer science graduate course. You should have some experience in C or C++ or Java or Python and so on. I don't formally require that you know anything about web development. Of course, you're going to have an easier time if you do. But we will be teaching you like what is an HTML element, what is a JavaScript called, how do I manipulate the DOM, and so on. But you definitely need to know like some kind of like software engineering. Like you need to have an idea about what is object-oriented programming, what is functional programming, and this kind of stuff. And I'm saying this because this class traditionally has a lot of non-CS students that are taking it. It's also going to be not your average computer science course, right? There's not going to be a lot of math. And there's going to be a lot of coding, but there's a lot of going to be design thinking about like HCI kind of stuff. So we really care about the human in the loop. And so I really ask you to engage in that, because if you engage in it, it is usually a ton of fun. And there is going to be some kind of like, you need to be willing to learn new software and new tools. And especially if you're not a proficient programmer, notice that this can be time consuming. And so homeworks, if you're not a proficient programmer, they can take a fair bit of time. Just make sure that you start them and that you leverage all the resources that we provide. If this isn't like something that you're very used to or very skilled in. And so some of the skills you will need to build yourself, because like especially if you like don't have like a traditional CS background. So formalities, how are you graded? There will be 6 homework assignments. They have varying value between 2 and 10% of your overall grade, depending on the length and the difficulty. As I already said, start early. It will take long if you don't know JS or D3 yet. They're always due on Fridays. We have a late day policy. So Friday at midnight is when you have to submit your homework. If you need more time, you don't need to ask. You can just submit a day later and lose 10% per day up to Sunday night. And then after Sunday night, we're not accepting any homework anymore because essentially we'll be starting the grading on Monday. Final project is the most important component of this course. It alone is 40%. It's done in teams. It has a proposal and 2 milestones. All of those are graded separately. We'll talk more about the final project later, but this is really like bringing together all of the things that we do in the class. And then there will be 2 exams. They're 10% each. They will be like, well, it's last class before fall break, or where fall break would have been in the normal semester and at the end of the term. And so these are going to be like take home. You have 24 hours to complete them, and they're going to be open book. And they're going to be like mostly, again, design critiques. Usually I do closed book and a little bit more about facts, but I don't think that works well in a distributed setting. And then we'll have these group activities, 1% each of the activities, 5% in total. This should be easy point for you to get if you just participate. We have a code of conduct. We are committed to providing an inclusive and harassment-free environment, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, race, or religion. We do not tolerate any harassment. If you experience any harassment, please report it to me or to the appropriate university office, or to both. There's like safu.utah.edu. Please make sure to review the syllabus on these issues and the student code of conduct for the whole university. So this is not an unpleasant topic, cheating. Since a lot of your submissions are going to be code-based, it is often tricky. Like unfortunately, we see cheating all the time in computer science classes. And so here is like very explicitly the cheating policy. Like you're welcome to discuss ideas about homeworks, like material, also how to solve something with other people, but the work you turn on in must be your own for the project, and for the homework. So you must write your own code, you must design your own visualizations, and you must critically evaluate the results in your own words. You may not submit the same or similar work to this course that you have already submitted or will submit to another, nor may you provide or make available your solution to homework to others who take or may take this course in the future. All of these are considered academic misconduct. School of Computing has very clear misconduct policy. Please review that. Essentially, you will fail a class if we catch you cheating, and a strike will be recorded. And if you get multiple strikes recorded with the School of Computing, you might have to leave the program. And notice that we automatically check for plagiarism in all of your submissions. And so it is really easy for us to catch cheating. So do a cost-benefit analysis, like losing points if you're like late on a homework is not a big deal, right? There are so many other ways of making up versus failing a class and then also losing tuition. And tools like Moz make it really easy for us to automatically catch cheating. And if you've cheated or copied code in the past from another class and you haven't been caught, it's most likely that you haven't been caught because no one checked, not that they couldn't have caught you. Or they didn't want to bother with the hassle of like reporting cheating. So this is very complicated. And I encourage you really like, just don't copy anybody's code. This is the most important piece. You can discuss it, you can ask for help, you can ask for somebody to look over your shoulder and help you. That's all fine, but you should never ever copy anybody's code. So I want to wrap up on a more positive note, like a bit of an outlook. This week we'll have homework 0, including the course survey. We'll have a lecture on perception on Thursday. You should be reading chapters 1 to 3 in the D3 book and chapter 1, the introduction and the visualization in a VDA book. Next week we have the homework 1U, and then we'll start with like technical part, introduction to Git, because I think it's useful and maybe not everybody has seen it, HTML, CSS. And then we'll start off with office hours to kind of like give you an opportunity to ask questions for the TAs. Mine office hours start immediately. Homeworks are always published on GitHub, so you can already see homework 0 and homework 1 being available. We usually, like we essentially promise you that we will always release the homework the Friday before it's due. So you are the Friday 2 weeks before it's due if it's a 2-week homework. Last word of kind of like advice, just make sure to like, some people, not many, but some people always every year don't really do the first or second or third homework. Those are the easiest homeworks. It's the easiest to get points in those couple of homeworks. So really just make sure to submit these homeworks and put in a good effort, because these are easy points to get, and later on the homeworks get more complicated. And if you have a safe buffer of points, you can kind of like don't have to worry so much about the homeworks later. So that concludes it for today. I'm usually happy to take questions. Today, I'll basically just like end the presentation on Hangout for a bit, and then I'll be in my office hours. So I'll stop sharing now.
There was a question in chat asking about the format of the critique submissions.